ha and I was the trending one, the latest one, the hot one, and in your eka. Let me see how much to say any answer no, my one will be a no pa saying tea. I was a best say in some not yet bad, not me, but so at the amount.
The World Bank has cautioned Ghana over any consideration for a return to the international capital market anytime soon. The World Bank, in its Ghana Public Financial Review report, revealed Ghana's expenditure grew faster than the growth rate recorded in the last 12 years, with 70% of it dedicated to public wages, interest payment, and earmarked statutory funds. Here's more.
The report from the World Bank explored the critical role of effective fiscal policies and public financial management in achieving sustainable and equitable economic growth. World Bank Country Director Robert Taliosio said a premature return to the international market could send the wrong signals to the market and a reversal to unsustainable borrowing costs.
As a point of history, Ghana has requested a record of 17 IMF programs, and as a result, the country has been in IMF programs for 40 out of its 68 years of history. So I think this does drive home the point about not returning to business as usual, but moving on. A premature return to international capital markets could send the wrong signal and reverse unsustainable, and also a reversal to unsustainable borrowing costs. I think it's critically important at this juncture in Ghana's history from the World Bank perspective that it sends strong signals about credible reforms and including structural reforms going forward. That would be the really great signal to send.
He further indicated that a not fully completion of the adjustment program reducing debt to GDP ratio to 55% by 2028 could jeopardize the credibility of policy reforms and the fundamentals for long-term growth.
Not fully completing the adjustment program, that is reducing debt to GDP to 55% by 2028, could jeopardize the credibility of policy reforms and the fundamentals for long-term growth. Hence, it's important to initiate a reset, as His Excellency President Mahama has said, to maintain momentum and stay the course with the ongoing reforms while deepening efforts in specific areas. One of those areas is strengthening fiscal discipline to ensure that effective expenditure management and control. Government expenditure grew faster than GDP between 2010 to 2022, and about 70% of this growth was dedicated to public wages, interest payments, and earmarked statutory funds. Another key priority is boosting domestic revenue collection to enlarge fiscal space. Collected revenue as a share of GDP fell to 13% by 2021.
The World Bank is asking government to address the growing fiscal liabilities from SOEs, namely in the energy and cocoa sectors. James Eshan's report for Joy Business.
And we want to stay a longer with the World Bank because they have revised Ghana's growth rate projection for 2024 to 4.0% from the initial 4.8% reported by the October 2024 Africa Pulse report. Now, this is, however, the same as the International Monetary Fund forecast of 4.0%. And we've got more in this report for you.
According to its January 2025 Global Economic Prospects, the country's economy is expected to expand by 4.2% and 4.8% in 2025 and 2026 respectively. This is, however, lower than the pre-COVID-19 pandemic average of 5%. The World Bank said the risks to the outlook are tilted to the downside. Further downside risks include a sharper than expected economic slowdown in China, escalating global geopolitical tensions, especially on intensification of the conflict in the Middle East, and worsening political instability and an escalation of violent conflict in the region, especially in East Africa and the Sahel.
Have a conversation on the back of these projections from the World Bank on Ghana's economic outlook. Joining us via Zoom is economist Professor Patrick Isuming. Pleasure you could join me, sir, on Prime Business. Now, beyond the growth rate projection for 2024 to 4.0%, the World Bank is saying that the country's economy is expected to expand by 4.2% and 4.8% in 2025 as well as 2026 respectively. Your take?
Yes, I think the growth rate is really the World Bank aligning with the projections that have been around for a while. I think the IMF has already done the revision to their projections. So it's more of the bank bringing it in line, having seen the information for the first 3 quarters. But I think, 4.2 going forward is still quite low. And the expectation is that we would have returned to the pre-COVID growth of 5.1 or so by end 2025. So if you shift it to 2026, it tells you that 2025 is projected to be a little bit more difficult than initially anticipated.
And these are projected figures. However, we must work hard to achieve that. For you, what must we do to make these projections, a bit feasible?
Well, I think if you look at how the 2024 started, even ending with 4%, even though it's higher than what we projected when we started the year, it's still very low. It's still below our growth potential. And if 2025 expands by only 4.2, it's still way below our potential. So I think there's still a lot of work to be done. The risks that have been identified mostly are external to us. I think domestically, we really have to ensure that we make the right investment. I think it's interesting that the prior report was about financing, because I think the government is in a very tight spot in terms of where to find additional financing from. If the growth in public expenditure over the last 10 years had been committed to investment in energy and agriculture, for instance, I'm sure we would be seeing the fruit. So, review of the meager finances, I think making sure that we invest more to improve our energy sector, as well as committing more to agriculture, I think that's something we should be paying attention to.
All right. So for you, could this projected growth be attributed to the IMF's supervision?
I'm not so sure. I think much of this, if you look at the first 3 quarters of last year, for instance, the main source of growth has been from mining and quarry. And you know that we've had new mines open and a revamping of some of the old mines. And then we've seen the ICT sector also do well. There's some election-related construction. So I'm not sure that, when the IMF program bears fruit, you see a more improved and a more stable macroeconomy. And then you see a more widespread, broad-based growth. That's not what we are seeing at the moment. So I'm not sure that we want to attribute that to the IMF program.
In the meantime, the World Bank again is cautioning Ghana over any consideration to return to the international capital market anytime soon. And I guess this is a good call.
Absolutely. I think that what we should be doing is to try and build the economy to become more resilient and improve it. I think an idea that we are doing this so that we can return to the international capital market shouldn't be anything we should even be contemplating at all. That kind of financing has been extremely expensive. It's a major reason why we ended up at the IMF in the first place. So I think building a more sustainable way of financing the economy and making sure the economy is more resilient to some of the shocks that it's seen, and building an economy that creates jobs for Ghanaians is what should be our focus, not returning to the capital markets that has brought us into this struggle in the first place.
All right. So as it stands now, we do know Finance Ministry is proposing the 10th of March as the date to present this year's budget to Parliament. And I'm wondering what your expectations are.
Well, I think it's a very important budget, especially for a new government. This is really where, rubber meets the road. This is where we find out whether all the things that have been promised, whether the government really means to put them into action. I think we've heard that the IMF has been in town, and with all these proposals about removing some of the taxes, I think now is the time for us to find out. But I think, for me, I want to see the government begin to chart a completely different path in terms of coming up with more sustainable ways of raising revenue, and then also committing to a much more long-term strategy in terms of where we go from here. So one budget cycle is not enough to see a lot of detail, but I think it could give us a signal as to exactly where we are going. So we don't the past 10 years or so, where we've done some short-term firefighting approach to generating revenue and try to engineer growth. I really want to see that we move away from that, and the government is going to communicate a clear long-term strategy of where they want to take this economy in the 4 years, especially beyond the IMF program.
Very well. Thank you so much, Professor Patrick Isuming. Always a delight speaking to us here on Prime Business.
enti ensem no na yetie abusuafo obetimi eja comment no de amame ewo comment section papa na meje bre akinkan de abusuafo ansa na mesori mo so no mekai obium se aha Ghanatube, trending hot issues, latest issues, sad news, happy news, ni kaka wona ebusuafo aha na onsa ebenka ni na intimation yourself. Or best subscribe amami na afin so odo wonsa emia notification bell no so so e dey amami send e be ya se ensem no me tuma na wenya no entem pass me ma o we fin so se obe like in videos no e dey amai na me ametina se e dey ensem no ebrem midin ene slowly sisi ade makram